A warm welcome to one and all. Thank you for joining our new session of Thursday Night Talks. Today we will hear about challenges, trends in pharma and innovation drivers. We acknowledge the presence of our guest speaker, Dr. Nishith Tyagi. Thank you for joining us. He is a director of Novartis Pharmaceuticals. Welcome, Dr. Tyagi. It's indeed a pleasure to have you as our speaker.
Thank you, Mansi. Pleasure is all mine. Thanks for having me here. Good evening.
In fireside conversation with him will be one of our esteemed charter member, Mr. Venkat Kamalakar Bundla, founder and MD of Garvey Biosciences. He is also a board member of TI Hyderabad. As you see his profile on screen, and I'm sure most of us, rather all of us know sir very well. But I would just like to add up or sum it up by saying a business leader, advisor, angel investor, and a keen golfer. Thank you, Venkat sir, for your time, and thank you for bringing in Dr. Nishith today for our session. With that, and without any further delays, I'm going to hand over the session to you, Venkat sir, to please introduce Dr. Nishith Tyagi and take the session away. Over to you, Venkat sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mansi. Welcome aboard, Nishith, and good evening to all the charter members, associate members, and the guests who have joined us this evening. It's my pleasure to introduce Nishith, who's one of those rare persons who's worked on both sides of the table. He's been a practicing doctor, and then he's now working with Novartis for the last 15 years. Nishith's key interests. Nishith, as Mansi pointed out, he's the director, data science and AI solutions for Novartis worldwide, and he's an important he's an important part and parcel of Novartis global, specifically in data science and AI solutions, and is focused on US and European pharmaceutical markets. I'm outlining this lest he be confused as working with Novartis India. Nishith's key interests in the pharma industry include drug development, commercial assessments, uncovering patient and physician value drivers, and data-driven insights to fuel strategic decision-making. He's an author of multiple articles in peer-reviewed journals and has done extensive research on the patient's experiences with disease, their disease management and quality of life impact by leveraging data science and traditional approaches. So once again, welcome aboard, Nishith.
Thank you.
Before we move on, I just want to set the expectations right. So this, as everybody would agree, pharma is huge and vast, and boundaries are ever expanding. There are multitude of stakeholders, interplay of various disciplines, and to that extent, it's difficult to do justice in an hour of conversation. So what we intend doing is briefly outline the interdisciplinary impact as well as the multi-stakeholders in the pharma environment, and then move on to some of the challenges that pharma faces to enable the house to get a brief preface. I think that should be okay with you, Nishith?
That is perfectly all right. Thanks, Venkat, and thanks for a very warm welcome. It's a pleasure and delight to be here to speaking with all of you.
And also, I'm conscious that many of us are not very conversant with the pharma R&D drug delivery process. So what we would be trying to do during the course is, after we set the backdrop and a brief preface, move on to some of the key innovation drivers. As one would imagine, there are several of them which are transforming drug discovery and healthcare delivery. That again is huge and very vast. We will try and restrict our discussion with respect to the trends, specifically in social media, big data and analytics, and round it off with AI and machine learning, which I think would be of great interest for some of my fellow charter members who come from the IT background. So, Nishit, uh, as we all know, there are multitude of stakeholders in pharma, which makes life not that easy. I mean, as you know, there are patients, doctors, paramedics, and caregivers on one side. Then you have the regulators, payers, insurance companies, academics, clinicians, health technology assessment agencies, the industry itself, governments. Then you have the multilateral aid agencies, patient advocacy groups, and the list is unending. So we welcome your brief comments on how do you see the interplay of so many stakeholders and how the industry has been uh, working on a tightrope.
Right. A very interesting point, as you yourself pointed out, Venkat. It's a very complex environment, and the complexity increases even more if you look at the interplay of these various stakeholders, right? At one end is the consumer or the end users, the other end is a physician who is having the best interest of their patient in mind. But on the other side is the development industry, the pharma industry, biopharma industry, rather, we should say, and regulators and government, right? So who are regulating this entire environment. One thing critical to understand for pharma, it's one of the most heavily regulated industry. Anything that happens within the pharma world is primarily, approval based by the regulators, different government agencies, or the federal agencies across the world. They actually are responsible for ensuring that the environment is regulated and the best interest of the end users and physicians and everybody is taken care. Now, in order to really understand how does the pharma industry actually work, we need to understand slightly, because as you mentioned, some of us may not be familiar with the pharma process as such. It would be good to very briefly spend some time on how does a drug development look like, and maybe we'll also talk about the value chain for pharma, because that's something that every business leader will be able to understand. First up is, if you look at how the drug development happens, it's a long journey. Generally, if you look at it, to get a drug into the market, it takes at least 10 to 12 years to get the drug into market. And then there are different phases for it. The journey for the development will actually start somewhere by identifying what is the disease that we are trying to cure, right, or treat. And it's at the pre-drug state, the drug candidates that we would call, in the preclinical stage, or the stages where most of the lab work is done, the tests on animals and understanding of the different mechanism, how a drug will work inside a biological system. These are the things that are done. So that particularly is, and also understanding, what the structure of the molecule is that we are developing. And these are all very complex and technical things. Really do not want to go into the details of that to overwhelm the people. But the key thing to understand is, if you are going to make something, you need to understand its structure, how it works in a body, in a biological system, and what are you looking at. Now, when this journey starts, right, after the lab experiments, if those are successful, you move into a stage of clinical development, because now you have identified structure, the targets, and how it will work. Clinical development itself has different phases, which the industry traditionally calls as phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Now, these phases are very different and yet very important into the development, right? Phase 1, for example, just a very brief on what these phases look like. Phase 1 is generally in the healthy patients, or healthy subjects, rather, we should say, to test if the drug is safe enough to be given to the humans, right? And if it has a smaller number of people participating in these clinical trials, somewhere to the tune of 20 to 100, depending on the size of the overall disease that we are targeting. If you are successful there, you move into the phase 2, where the size of the participants will increase, and now you'll have the real patients who are suffering from that disease, to really understand efficacy and safety, but on a smaller population of the patients. if you're able to establish that the drug is safe and is effective as well, and mind it, this is all regulated. You have to, all the time you move from one stage to another, you are getting approval for designing your clinical trials from the regulatory authorities. When you move into the phase 3, you're actually looking at a slightly larger population. And depending again on what disease we are looking at, these numbers are in thousands. It could be 1,000, it could be 5,000 as well. And then you conduct these trials in multiple centers in multiple countries, given what your ambition is to go global, regional, and so on. Now, at each stage, I have said, if you move from this stage to that, right? One important statistic to remember is from a preclinical stage where we started somewhere around 5,000 to 10,000 compounds, only one makes it to the end of the clinical trial phase 3 that gets approved by the regulator. So if your efficacy, safety, and all other parameters are met in phase 3, the federal drug authorities or the government authorities will give an approval for marketing the drug. One drug out of 10,000, 5,000 to 10,000 comes after 10 to 12 years. And job here is not done yet, because once you launch a drug in the market, your job is to continue the post-marketing surveillance also, to continue to monitor what are the adverse events that are happening, how is the drug behaving in the real world, and so on. That's a continuous monitoring. So in a way, this process never stops till the time your drug is in market. And as I said, it's very complex, but along with this is very time consuming as well as a very costly affair.
Just for this thing to add to that, I would like to underscore that pharma companies required to file annual safety updates with the regulators every year, as long as they are in the market.
That's
But
right.
before we move on to the others, I know you touched upon it briefly. As I keep on telling some of the people in the industry, to succeed in drug discovery today, you need to be some kind of a jack of many trades and a master of at least one. It's very essential that the scientists in the drug development have the depth and the breadth. I'm underscoring this, particularly this could have made a lot of takeaways for some of the people who are here from the IT industry. So drug discovery is an interplay of many disciplines, from synthetic organic chemistry on one side to molecular and cellular biology, immunology, from in vitro to in vivo pharmacology, toxicology, from basic sciences to clinical testing, genomics to bioinformatics, and the list goes on, even with the advent of high throughput screening of compounds and in silico modeling tools. You need to have understanding and engineering and computer science, to name one of few. So given this context, maybe if you could delve some more time in terms of how pharma is different, and how do you bring about this complex ecosystem into one single wholesome
Right.
arena.
Yeah, and a great point, right? As you so this multidisciplinary field that requires almost every different type of the chemical and the biological sciences to come in. And the only thing that I'll say has actually increased how the pharma company becomes successful is the advent of the IT fields within the pharma, bioinformatics and everything else that you can imagine. But I'm sure the agenda of the point here is not to really go into the details of how these fields are doing, but important thing that I would like to highlight here, the complexity of the different interdisciplinary subjects coming into play to lead the pharma companies into the development and discovery and development and also approval of these drugs. The most important aspect is there are three, if I were to simplify for all of us, there are three different value chains that we can have within the healthcare system, right? Primarily, if you look at it, the first one I was talking about from a preclinical stage, drug development and marketing and all, this is primarily where the pharma companies, I'm sorry, where the pharma companies play an important role. That's where the multidisciplinary fields of biology and chemistry, they all come into play. The second important aspect of the overall value chain here is the healthcare provider, which you call the doctor or the physicians, right? Now, the key job, and here again, this is again a multidisciplinary one. Different aspects in the healthcare or the physician value chain is taken care by different specialties. It will probably start with analyzing which is the population that is at risk. Something we saw in the COVID times as well. When you looked at, there is a government organization who is looking at how is the disease spreading, what is the epidemiology rate looking like now. Somebody is doing the genomics research and so on. That's one. Then they also play an important role in prevention of the disease. And if there is a disease, then the treatment of the disease. And depending on what disease we are talking about, it is a primary care healthcare provider, or a secondary or a tertiary, depending on how the diseases or the different stages of the diseases are, right? And also providing the long-term care to the patients. So that's the job of the physicians and the doctors that they play in this entire healthcare value system. The third is the payers or the insurance companies, as you would normally call them, right? Their job is primarily to look at how do we provide coverage to the patients who are getting treatment for these diseases, right? And they provide management of the medical services. And this is very different in developed countries and compared to India. If you look at India, there is a very small percentage of population that is under cover through insurance, right? They also provide services and so on. Now, when I simplified these value chain as three: the pharma companies, the healthcare, and the insurers or the payers that we talk about, their interplay is very critical, in order to ensure that the best of the products are available to the patients, and they reach these patients faster. And also we continue to understand on an ongoing basis that how these drugs, the different treatments, different medical services, they are doing their job for the patients.
Great. I think I would like to be in your shoe, because given the vastness of the interplay, you could still synthesize it into a few minutes. That's great. See, the other thing that you see is we've had challenges even before, and we continue to have the challenges, simplest of them being developing new molecules that can cure or prevent some of today's incurable diseases, say such as Alzheimer's, some of the cancers. There are many unmet therapeutic needs because of obvious unknown biological mechanisms and biomarkers of diseases, translational failures using animal models. That's been another challenge area, lack of clinical phenotyping and patient stratification. And also, if you will, inadequate collaboration among academia, industry, and government. Essentially, lack of platforms, very focused platforms to facilitate some of these collaborations. And on the other side, you have the never-ending pricing pressures, rising costs of increasing uh, demands from the regulators in terms of drug development costs. So given the complexity of these challenges, obviously the industry finds itself under tremendous strain. Can you enumerate some of the challenges facing the pharma today, uh, so that the audience can get a good background on how they tie in with some of the specific aspects of pharma value chain, which you stressed in the last question.
Yeah, great. And you pointed it right. So there are challenges, almost every step of the drug development that we see. Now, there have been challenges which are very traditional in nature. They have been there for ages, right, for the pharma company. But some of these have been augmented in the recent years. The first thing and the most important thing that I see is increasing cost pressures. So there is an ever increasing R&D cost that the pharma company is bearing, especially the innovator pharma companies. And the rates of return are diminishing on an ongoing basis. Just to share a number, right? If you look at 50 years into the historical data, the cost of R&D or the development of a drug has increased almost 10 times. And between 2010 and now, we have almost a double R&D spend that was done for a development of one drug molecule earlier. I hear some background noise. If you're not speaking, can you please go on mute?
Guys, can you please mute?
Thank you very much. So what I was saying is, even if you look at the last decade, the cost of developing a drug has gone from somewhere around 1 billion to upwards of the 2 billion at this stage, right? So, and the number of the drug candidates that are getting approved, it is decreasing. Now, there are multiple factors that are playing an important role in increasing costs and so on. Earlier, we used to have most of the drugs were chemical compounds, synthetic drugs, and so on. Now there is a huge rush towards the biologics, which are complex, large molecules, but are more targeted therapies. So these are the better ones, if I were to say that. Understanding them, creating their structures, understanding their structures, and bringing them to the market, it's a very complex arrangement, and hence there is a cost increase here. Now, you mentioned a very important point about Alzheimer disease, and I would specifically touch upon that. Now, we know one drug candidate out of hundreds, gets approved, but the highest failure rate that happened today, Alzheimer is one of the indication, one of the disease where there is a highest failure rate, and still no cure in sight, or not even a standard of care that can provide adequate relief to the patients. Right? Now, a lot of this cost that we are talking about, it is spent on the drug discovery phase of it, right? Lesser on the clinical development, but the discovery phase consumes a large part of it. Somewhere around 33% to 40% of the drug cost is spent there. So this is one big challenge, and cracking this particular scenario, reducing the costs for R&D or ensuring that these costs are contained. This is very important to bring the drugs faster to the market and also at a right price that is affordable to the patients. That is first challenge, and it has been a traditional one and augmented in the recent years. The second thing that I see here is there is a trend towards aging population globally, right? Some of the stats say that 16% of the world population will be above 65 years in no time, right? One in every 6 people is going to be above 65. Now, what does it mean? That the policymakers, healthcare policymakers, the pharma companies, they have to really think about how do we contain the cost, because the payers, the government bodies, the patient themselves, they'll start feeling the pressure on their pockets for paying for this large population as well. So which is certainly an economical burden of the disease that we would like to call in this context, right? So that is the second challenge. How do we contain cost and still provide care to anybody and everybody who needs it? The third and important thing, which generally if you look at it, is knowing the needs of the patients and physicians faster and be able to take care of these needs even faster. So this is an important aspect. And why I say so is, if you look at the general disease management, there is a misdiagnosis sometimes that happens, which is a wrong diagnosis, to put it in literal terms. Now, when a wrong diagnosis happens, for example, what you will observe is that the patient, the healthcare system has spent some cost in trying to manage something which was not there in first place, right? This puts in additional pressure on the healthcare system, and the costs is driven up as a consequence. Now, how do we really understand these needs faster so that we can tackle the disease at the right stage and ensuring that the experience of the disease management, both at the physician side and the patient side, is actually very smooth. So I see these are and there are multiple other challenges driven by the trends that we see, but primarily these are the three I would like to put forward as something we need to tackle urgently.
I think essentially regulators and the governments are also moving towards, as well as the payers, they're moving towards more and more on outcomes rather than just cure rates. So, but I think I'm also conscious we're already reaching the halfway mark. So let me get on to some of the focus uh, areas that we shortlisted for the enumerating some of the innovation drivers, specifically with respect to IT. I mean, as everybody knows, the internet has not only changed how we live, how we communicate and socialize, but also it has had a tremendous impact on how we manage our health, more so in the developed economies. I believe each day close to about 1.6 billion people use Facebook. Instagram has virtually more than 1 billion monthly active users. And a vast majority of the people I'm seeing are present on these social media platforms. They spend a lot of time on them every day to get information, to make comparisons, to ask questions, if you will, and to look for answers related to one's own health and well being. So, to that extent, the role of social media for the pharma industry is increasingly becoming central and decisive. The industry has been, because of various reasons, compliance and regulatory pressures, has been a little slow to latching on to social media. But moving on, how do you see social media transforming the approaches to drug discovery, R&D, and becoming a valuable in terms of making innovation more patient-centric? So I would love you can share some insights. I know you've done a lot of work in this area, so and the opportunity areas which could be a good takeaway for some of us.
Right. You're right. So social media, everybody has access to social media and internet today. In our general life as well, we look for information, and we look for, even if we were to look search for the commodities, the first thing for us really to do is go to the net and find that information, right? And as soon as you start looking for that information, you start getting pop-ups everywhere on the social media sites on what is and they start making recommendations to you. Okay, you searched for an XYZ commodity, that same thing will start appearing on your Facebook page and so on, right? Now, this makes social media really a powerful tool, right? But the important thing here to first really understand is, as a pharma company, most important aspect is the compliance. Um, the data that is available in the social media, it cannot be used just like that. You cannot really go to the social media and get patient information or understand what they are doing and how they are doing, right? Um, the more the hidden point here is, uh, patients are not sharing their information so that we can benefit out of it from a commercial standpoint. Not at all. Pharma companies, they have their own data privacy rules. The government bodies and the regulators, they have their data privacy rules so that this data is not mismanaged, or it's not used for the purpose that it is not intended. So that is, I wanted to just set that context right on the social media data first up. Now coming, yeah, please, if you want.
No, do you see to that extent the industry coming out some kind of self-regulation?
There are
code of ethics?
There are. Yes. So industry has the self-regulations as well. Each company has the social media data privacy guidelines on how we can use social media, and even how we share information in the social media in the first place. There are legal aspects to it, which are highly regulated and go through the approval processes. Now, these legal aspects will differ from country to country depending on what the federal laws in that country actually state for the usage of social media. So there is, yes, a very serious effort at the industry's end as well to make sure that data is used in a very compliant way. Now, coming to the point of what this data is and how we can really use this data. I think we are how we can use this data to make sure that we understand our patients better and are able to fulfill their needs. So if you look at the different blogs and patient forums where patients are sharing their information, As I was mentioning earlier, if you're looking for a commodity, you go to net, and same thing is happening with the patients. When they are experiencing symptoms, they start visiting internet to find out what is happening with them. They do go to the physician for sure. And if the physician is advising them some kind of tests or a diagnosis to begin with, they check on the internet what this diagnosis means, and because they want to know more and more about it, right? So that is a good aspect because awareness is increasing about within the patient community. Now, when a patient is actually going into the social media, different tools that are available within social media, blogs and forums, as you say, there are many other patients with similar kind of diseases, similar experiences, talking about themselves and what is happening with them. They're also talking about what tests are prescribed to them. They're talking about what are the different treatment they are taking and how they are experiencing improvement in their condition or not experiencing improvement in their condition because of the treatment. All of this is available in social media, direct from the horse's mouth. And traditionally, if you look at it, pharma industry takes great pride in knowing their patients and physicians' need for sure. Now, social media opens up another venue to find that need and understand that need in a compliant way. Um, if you start from experiencing symptoms to the diagnosis of a disease, and then how does somebody take a treatment, and what subsequently happens when they start taking a treatment. So all of this patients do share in the social media space. Now, understanding this, or what we generally call is the patient journey, understanding this and building that patient journey to really understand where the patients need more help is very critical. Right? It is done through the traditional primary market research way as well. It's done through the social media research as well. Now, not only that you get to know the 0 and 1 aspect, black and white aspect, but you also get to know their experiences, their sentiments, how they feel about it, right? And this is where, from a awareness standpoint, we get to know where does somebody need to intervene, whether it is a pharma company or it is a government body or the physicians. How do you intervene and spread that awareness? If a patient is looking for an information, you know that they are looking for an information. How do you guide them to the right information? So that's more of a community management and the content management part of it that comes into play. And hence it becomes a very important and powerful tool to ensure that what the patient need is understood, and also we identify the areas where we can intervene more proactively as an industry or a regulator or government bodies and so on, non-government organizations, patient organizations, and so on. So that's a critical role social media is playing. Now, you touched upon the R&D aspect of it. I won't say the research part of it, but from a development standpoint, yes. And I can share an example around it. Generally, what happens in the clinical trials is we have a fixed set of protocol that we will test the patients on. But there are different things that patients are talking about it, about themselves, about their diseases. We can pick up clues from these discussions and from in the social media and see if we are making an impact on their quality of life as well during the clinical trial or during the development process of the drug, and see how it is working in improving those aspects. Maybe it's not just the drug that will help in improving, it is some services or some other things going beyond the pill kind of an aspect. What else is required apart from the drug or a tablet that will help the patient in getting the right answers or improve their quality of life? That's where social media can play a very important role. It's in the, I won't say it is in the nascent stage for usage. It is little advanced from the nascent stage, but not yet at the peak. And there is a lot of opportunity to help the patients through that.
And to add what you're saying, a lot of work is underway both at Facebook, Google,
Exactly.
channelizing some of these cues and using them into a meaningful fashion. So that kind of brings us to the next obvious one, the role of big data analytics. I mean, as you said, the costs are spiraling for developing the drugs. Then you have I think, then you have the ever constant threat of uh, products or molecules nearing patent expiration. And at the end of the day, pharma companies have to report back to their financial stakeholders, and that's a key aspect of their business. Uh, so just going back, how can big data help accelerate the process of drug discovery and development? Because I perhaps feel, as you would agree, is there's a lot of vast data sets of patients, scientific publications, and clinical trials which is available. And how do you use predictive analytics in the search of these parameters to get some kind of a more actionable data and insights on which avenues are likely to yield better results in drug discovery and development? And whilst commenting on this, I would encourage you to touch upon the recent initiative between many of the big pharma in establishing Project Data Sphere for sharing of some of the proprietary information.
Right. Thanks, Venkat, for this question, and you're making me think now. Right. So big data in itself has a lot of potential to really do the predictive analytics, modeling, and subsequently help in different parts of the value chain that I described earlier. Now, especially in the development phase of it, or even from the real world evidence, there is a lot of scope that real world data can actually bring in. I'll talk about some of the examples how it can actually help, and then talk where we stand as a pharma industry in ensuring that we are using it in the most productive way available today. Now, look at an example of a product X. I'll call it product X because I'm not at liberty to share the name. This product, assume this is a nutritional supplement used by the patients who are terminally ill and having cancer, right? So these patients are not able to eat and they're given this liquid diet, and constantly the patient will continue to feel hunger because you're on liquids. There is no solid going in. Now, when the company actually looked at the uptake of this particular product, what they understood is initially they went very good. There was a lot of interest in the product from the patient and the physicians, but they started to realize it is not getting used as it should be, because they could see the benefit in the real world that this product was bringing in. It could actually satiate the hunger that the patients continuously used to feel. Now, what did they do? They just went into trying to understand who these patients or their caregivers are, because patients generally they'll not be able to come. They're talking about the terminally sick patients, but who is providing care to them? They would visit on this website and to find out what this product is and so on. This website would have different sections. For example, talk about the product itself, its benefits, how do you feel after 6 months, 12 months, and so on and so forth, right? And maybe you can type a question and get to chat with a bot to really understand what is, to get to answer some of the questions that you might have, right? Now, when you visit it first time, they're going to a generic website, but when the patient or their caregiver, they visit second time, it is a customized one, because now they know the patient specifically they're talking about is very ill or terminally ill or just ill and so on and so forth, right? Now they started customizing their experience by understanding their behavior on their website and also trying to map that to what the status of the patient is, right? Now, in order to do that, what did they do? They did two things primarily. Understood the behavior of anybody visiting the website on what they are looking for, and mapped it to the portfolio or the benefits of the product that they had developed, right? This mapping, now it's coming from millions and millions of patients that you're talking about, right? So this is where they were able to give a customized experience to the patients. That's where a real world experience kind of a thing actually comes in when you talk about using the big data generation and also using it more adequately. Now, second way to look at, from a development standpoint is also look at the real world data that is generated on a daily basis in the physician's office. The tests given to the physician, given to the patients, the treatment given and their outcome and everything, it is generally recorded in the electronic health record system. Some of the countries, they are advanced in their usage of electronic healthcare records. Some of them are not, and most of them are picking up today. If you go to the corporate hospitals, even in India, you will find your all entire record is available with them on a server, right? Now, when the patients are actually treated, right, and over a period of time, let's say for the chronic diseases, which are long-term diseases, they receive the treatment, their outcomes are mapped, and they are written down. If you take a large volume of this data set to really understand who are the subsegments of the patients who are benefiting from treatment A versus treatment B and who are not benefiting, can you also identify why people are not benefiting from these different drugs that are for that particular disease? Plus, you can also identify or predict rather who are the patients that are at a higher risk of a faster progression of the disease, right? In what period of time, knowing that patients started their journey at point A when they were diagnosed, and if you had a similar record of the patients over a long period of time, you could actually say over this period of time with some range of years or months, you could say the patient is going to experience ABC. Can it proactively inform the physician in taking the decisions to avoid a certain catastrophic condition later? Probably yes. Are we there yet in order to make these kind of recommendations? Not yet, but this is a paradigm, this is evolving, and maybe soon we'll be able to have this kind of predictive modeling with more precision coming in by understanding the real world evidence to be able to predict more accurately that what is going to happen to a patient in a shorter period of time. So this is another aspect of the big data being used, I can see. Now, I also said I'll talk about what is the challenge with the big data today, if you look at the pharma. So the different attributes of the big data, if you will call that as a velocity, veracity, and variety, and so on, volume of data. So the key challenge here is there is a huge variety of data. We collect data on thousands and thousands of parameters, which is available in the healthcare system. But one, the velocity is very low. The data that is fed into the system and that goes into the research process and other decision making, it's a slow process. The second thing is the quality of the data is also quite challenging because of the different systems used or because of a lot of manual intervention that exists today, right? The data that you and I are generating wearing a wristband right now, it is a very structured data that gets into it. But the data where a manual intervention comes in, there's a huge quality issue, and hence it opens up a new opportunity area. How do we make sure that the data we capture is the right data in the right way so that it can help in making the right decisions for the patients and be able to use it in a more strategic way to be able to develop drugs and take real world decisions faster.
Thank you. That was really good, very insightful. I think some of the stuff that you talked about in terms of customization, precision medicine, understanding essentially getting more insights into patient behavior, improving the compliance. Another area I feel is perhaps in the clinical trials where big data can assist identifying the appropriate patients to participate in a trial, remote patient monitoring, reviewing previous clinical trial events. So to that extent, how do you see big data and analytics role in optimizing efficiencies and improving the efficacy of clinical trials? Because that's a great part and parcel of drug discovery or making a drug to reach
Right.
the patients.
All right. So, and here I'll talk about the project data sphere that you mentioned earlier, right?
Okay.
Now, in terms of the development, we have each company has its own data, right? Whether it is developed by the non-governmental institutes like NIH in UK, the pharma companies elsewhere, and so on and so forth, right? Now, when you're conducting the clinical trials, right, you have a limited amount of data because, as I mentioned, you have a limited population to really test on. Right? And imagine for the same disease, multiple companies trying to, develop the drug. At one point in time, the situation was everybody having control on their data because it's proprietary data, and it will only be released to the regulators for an approval. Now, this has been seen as an opportunity, and the opportunity is many of the companies are coming together to pool in their clinical development data, clinical trial development data into one place, and which essentially means for a particular disease, your data just explodes. You have large amount of data that can help you in understanding which are the patients that we have recruited in the clinical trials, and who actually had a side effect, who did not have a side effect. You know the profile of these patients because the clinical trial evaluation and screening of the patients is very stringent and robust. So when you're going into the clinical trial, the first thing that it actually helps you is reducing the cost. You are not screening the patients who might not, so for whom that your drug might not be safe. That's number one. Number two is now you have the predictive power as well. So there is another concept which is emerging right now. And this concept is of the synthetic arm clinical trials, right? In a clinical trial, when you have two types of arms, test and control, let's call that. No randomization, I don't want to talk about the technical stuff. Test and control. Test arm is somebody who receives the drug, which is under investigation. And control arm is somebody who gets a standard of care, right? Now, if I were to really use only the drug which is under investigation in the patient, and for the control arm, use the real world data from the patients because they're already receiving the available standard of care, and see how does the two compare. There is already a commitment from some of the federal drug authorities, such as in US, to look at the real world evidence data and these synthetic arm outcomes to be mapped to the investigational drug. And this is where a lot of analytics and predictive modeling using the our real world data can actually help in expediting the clinical drug development also, and also save a lot of time and money in the development.
Okay, now that brings us to the last leg. We're already at 8:51. I think the way AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning have revolutionized our lives with the likes of virtual assistants, smart cars, smart homes, self-driving cars, chatbots, you name it, we have it. So I think, AI also presents tremendous untapped opportunities for business transformation in pharma. Uh, Big data and AI-powered analytics are bringing about radical shifts, if you will, innovation paradigms of the pharma sector, like in areas such as R&D, in terms of disease prevention, epidemic prediction, and also in remote monitoring. So I would be glad if you could touch upon these as well as some of the revolutions that we are seeing in manufacturing, especially in continuous manufacturing, quality control, to name a few.
Right. And this is usage of artificial intelligence and machine learning things. This is probably one of the game changers that the pharma industry is starting to adopt. Are we there yet when you say self-driven cars or chatbots and so on? Yes, we have a journey to cover before we reach there. However, there is a paradigm shift happening, and there are quite a few applications that you will see in the market coming up very soon. If you look at, and this is a publicly available information, if you look at it, how does artificial intelligence really help in changing the way we have traditionally been treating the patients, right? A simple example, although very complex in terms of the development, but a simple example for us to really understand today is, take an example of the patients who have a condition called NAMD. This is neovascular age-related macular degeneration. This happens generally in the old age where patients lose their sight, right? In some years, generally the patient will become blind. Not going too much into the treatment, the only treatment available is the physician will put up an injection into the eye to make sure that the things are right? Now, the only available treatment, and then there is a continuous follow-up. After 6 months, every 6 months, the patient will go to a physician. They'll scan it, their retina, and see if the condition is improving, worsening, whether it requires intravitreal injection or the injection in the eye right now, or it can wait. Now, as you see, there are multiple challenges here. A patient may not appear to the physician office in time. He may or may not get an appointment also in time, right? And there might be other things that can happen during this course. Now, what has happened is development of a very compact device, which is called a OCT device, ocular coherence tomography. It's like a VR machine that you put up on your eyes, on your head, right? And with gamification features and everything like that, right? Now, the patient wears it, the scan is taken, and in ideal state, what would happen is the scan would be sent to the physician to really see. Now, if there are many patients of this type, hundreds of patients under a physician's care, he will start receiving probably every week or every month, depending on how the patients decide to use it, hundreds of scans. Will they have time to really review all these scans and decide what is right and which requires immediate attention? Probably not. Now, what has happened here is these scans have taken data, the learning data from the right scans, which are the physiological scans, right, which do not have a disease condition. Anything which varies with the patient's previous scan and also the normal scan of the patients is alerted to the physician. And then based on that, they can review the scan, make their judgment call, because they are the best people, on top of the AI thing, to really look at whether this scan requires immediate attention, call the patient and provide them treatment. So applications in multiple diseases, multiple indications for multiple type of patients exist. This is just a beginning of the journey, I'll say, for these kind of different imaging and scan area, right? The other example that I can also think of it, because this is what happened here is it improves the quality of life of a patient, right? They don't have to visit unnecessarily, and they also visit in time because they're sending their scan to the physician. Right? It creates a lot of impact on the economic burden that we have of the disease, right? If a patient loses sight and becomes blind due to the disease progression, imagine what would be the resources that are required to support that particular patient, or either their life is miserable or you support them in certain ways. So all these costs, if you take into account the softer cost and the harder cost, it has a huge impact on how the entire economic burden of the disease can be reduced, right? Another application that I see is from a standpoint of computer vision. Although this is again a nascent area and an evolving area where even from an IT standpoint, this particular field has to evolve a lot. There's a lot of research that IT still needs to do on that one together with the data science elements. So generally, if you look at some diseases, let's say in the cancer space, you're doing CT scans, MRIs, and stuff like that, right? What is happening there is a physician looks at the scan and takes a call, which is the right thing to do. And traditionally, it has been like that. But can this be augmented with the help of the artificial intelligence and machine learning? Possibly, yes. Something that some tumor size, very, very small tumor size, if it is missed by a human eye, right? Can this be augmented by the usage of AI and ML algorithms? Probably yes. And this is the other application that I see. Now, in the beginning, I said misdiagnosis or late diagnosis of the disease puts a lot of pressure on the healthcare system. And also, if you're not able to crack the disease in time or catch the disease in time, what happens is the disease starts progressing, and then you're left with whatever options you are left with. These are the things which can actually enable early diagnosis of the disease. Combine this with ability to do predictive modeling. Now you are looking at a space where you are able to capture a disease much early, depending on the genomics data and so on. Having said that, important thing I'll point out is there's a lot that needs to be done in this space. We are not there yet, but this is one emerging field which can actually be, again, a game changer in the lives of patients and physicians. The third aspect and the final one, if I may take another 30 seconds, is also the field of natural language processing within this, right?
That's
A simple example here would be, and I'll keep it very brief, I'm aware of the time. Simple example here would be, there's a lot of publication, there's a lot of research available out there. And it's not possible for a human being to really read all these research. This can be enabled by natural language processing, by reading all the documents and pointing out, these are the things that we should be primarily looking at, because these are the important things, by doing topic modeling and other stuff that's available. Now, it helps in identifying which are the best of the research, the successful ones, and also ensuring that we put our money in the right kind of further studies that that can be done. So this is another area. It has progressed quite a bit, I'll say, but yes, a lot of improvement. Initially, you will have to invest heavily with the human intervention here, manual intervention, to build your training data sets and so on. But then automatically with the unsupervised learning and the machine learning algorithms can help shape it faster and deliver faster results on that.
Nishith, one last point before we move on to questions is, as I mentioned earlier too, manufacturing is one area where Indian AI firms can see a lot of role. Already people are using continuous manufacturing. There's a tremendous impact that can derive from preventive maintenance, predictive maintenance, I would say, or to that extent, quality control, design automation, and process automation, design optimization, stuff like that. Maybe if you could briefly touch upon, then we can move on to.
Yeah. Now, I have to change my hats from a physician to a data scientist to an engineer as well, Venkat. I'm sure you're making me think a lot. Now, I won't claim to be an expert on this area. However, if we look at it, the power of using machine learning and artificial intelligence algorithms to really be able to predict from the technical failures that happen online, there is tremendous, right? Now, the manufacturing is automated. There's a lot of sensors that you will have. You're not touching anything on the line, right? Everything is automated completely. But then there is a defined period for the maintenance of the different parts on the line that you see. Now, can you predict when a certain part will fail? You need to have adequate historical data. The same principle applies that I was mentioning about identifying whether the patient is at risk in future or not. But then here we're talking about a much shorter span and faster reaction to identifying the same things. The large volume of data that is generated through the sensors, whether it is a heat sensor or it is a sensor to control the process of a machinery and so on, these data points can actually help you understand, based on the previous failures, how is the next failure, or when is the next failure going to be, and what is the next failure going to be. So that's an area where from a manufacturing standpoint, primarily from the shop floor, that is important. But there is another element that I would like to point out. From a manufacturing standpoint, right, the quality controls because each drug, you picked up a very, very important point. Each tablet, each injection, everything, every formulation that goes out of a factory has to be of the right quality, which is approved by the regulatory bodies, right? There is no compromise on that. And what happens is you continue to test each sample from each batch, right? For samples from each batch at a regular interval. You have accumulated data from these quality controls over a long period of time to really understand what goes wrong and with what components. So instead of treating any failure related to quality later, you can start focusing at the early stages where you're having the ingredients, the mechanical processes that run, to really look at those areas of manufacturing to make sure that your quality errors are also minimized.
Thank you. I think I've not seen more consummate ability in terms of addressing varied questions. Thanks a lot. And I think we have a couple of questions. One is from Suresh before I throw the floor open, which had a question. Yes. Mm. Suresh,
As
I'd like to know your thoughts on genomic solutions and genetic testing.
yeah,
Is going to become mainstream.
uh, in a way, this is I'll say already mainstream.
Already.
If you look at how this is being leveraged, right? Human genome mapping is done thanks to the powers of the IT that it provided and so on, right? Now, is it being used rightly in the development or the research aspect of it? There are quite a few examples, right? One of the big pharma giant has a collaboration with a company called 23andMe, which has the genomic data for a large population, right? Now, what it means is you already know which are the mutations responsible for different types of diseases, be it cancer or otherwise, right? And you can leverage that large amount of data to be able to move your direct research process into the right direction. How it helps is, I'm sure, Suresh, since you asked this question, and it's a great one, thanks for putting it together. Um, you identify the pathways which will work. One simple example I'll put is within this 23andMe data set, there is good amount of research on an mTOR PIK3 pathway, which is very central to the oncology, right? And you get to know which are the different diseases where these pathways are playing an important role, and identify the right targets for the drug. And this is an area where biologics actually start or come in for the right targeted therapy, the large molecules that I was mentioning earlier, to be able to deliver better. When is it going to produce sufficient results for this to be making an impact? I cannot put a timeline on this, but we are looking at a future where these things are becoming important. They'll cut down your R&D time and also give you more targeted therapies to really work at.
So, Mansi, if anyone else has a few questions or anything, you could unmute them. I think we're ready to wind it up. Okay. Uh, so back to you, Mansi.
Thank you, Venkat sir. I would like to, in fact, start with saying a thank you to you for bringing in Dr. Nishith for a talk. Uh, Thank you, Dr. Nishith. Indeed, it was a pleasure listening from you. There was a whole lot that we learned from you. Thank you so
Thank
much. I'm sorry if I may just take up one question which has come up in the chat box.
Coming back to Indian pharma and biotech industry, they have mastered the technologies and innovative methods for generics and biosimilars. My question is, what are the challenges for the Indian companies for coming up with innovative drugs? You
All
want to
right.
take?
Yeah, sure. And thanks, Professor Vedana. It's a pleasure to have connected with you earlier today as well. And this is a great question, right? And I don't want to bring in the traditional aspect of what is stopping Indian companies from coming up with the innovative drugs, right? Because it's not about whether in India we can bring innovation into the drugs or not. It's more about, do we have that kind of an ecosystem that enables innovation, right? Um, let's go a little global and look at what is happening broadly in terms of innovation today. There are startups, smaller companies, one drug company coming up with one best-in-class drug, which is able to provide the best of the treatment to the patients in that one. So their entire energy is going into developing cure or treatment, or good treatment rather, into one drug, right? How are they able to do it? Because this is supported by a big ecosystem for innovation, be it funding, be it providing adequate arenas for the research and the tools and technologies to conduct the research. This is probably a time where India has been on this journey, in my opinion, and this is my personal view. For on this particular journey, India has been there for last few years at least, right? If we don't go into the decades. This ecosystem is improving. We have the best of the tools and technologies that can be there. The only thing that we also need to make sure is the will that we should have for for this kind of money to be put into the innovation, because as we saw, from 5,000 to 10,000, only one drug candidate makes to the final approval. That kind of a will we need to have, and these resources sometimes are seen to be lacking, and that's probably the only change in the attitude that we'll need to bring in. Except for that, I'm sure there is a lot of talent and resources as well. People like Venkat, who are the angel investors and driving research and development of the drugs, that's where you come in to really talk about the innovation landscape for India and mitigate the challenges that the researchers might have. They need support, and thus we need to recognize for sure.
Thank you, Dr. Nishith. I thoroughly enjoyed your chart. See, the thing is, globally, if you see the innovative drugs, it is a multitasking and multi-institutional collaboration is required. Academic institutions play a major role, and also the industry is ready to take the risk that are associated with the innovative drugs.
True.
So here, whether academic institutions are not able to gear up to come up with innovative discoveries, or the industry is shying away from the taking the risks. They are very happy with the generics and biosimilars.
Right. I wanted to put it in a more humble way, and you're just hitting the nail right on the head. That's what I'm saying. We need to increase our risk appetite, because from 10,000 molecules, only one gets approved. It is a risk, right? And then certainly, I completely agree with you, Professor Vedana. This is a mindset shift that we certainly need to have within Indian market as well.
To add to what you're saying, Nishith and Professor Redana, as the space is getting restricted, the companies are forced by the business environment to take on innovation. Innovation need not necessarily be coming up with best in class or first in class therapeutic this thing. There could be a lot of things which Indians can do in terms of repurposing current drugs and extending the drug delivery, 505(b)(2)s, what you call in the US. So there are a whole lot. And I think I see clear indications in that direction from the industry. They've been shy, but they're forced to if they have to survive and ride the tiger.
Right.
See, the Indian companies, so I think with the success with the generics and biosimilars, they have enough financial resources to take that kind of risk. But certainly, I think uh, it is not there yet in the country.
Certainly not there yet.
Yeah.
Can't agree more, Professor Zan, on that one.
Any other questions? If you look at very interesting. I think there are questions in general on the Indian environment. I think Government of India is working on a new R&D policy and in terms of aiming towards making India as one of the innovation hubs. This was set up under the chairmanship of Secretary of Pharma, Mr. Waghela. I think he just moved.
Hello?
Hello? Yeah, so as I was saying, Indian government is setting up, already set up a big committee under the chairmanship of Ella, who just moved to some other ministry. But you have a couple of industry representatives, Pankaj Patel of Zydus and Kiran Majumdar Shah of Biocon. Then they have representatives from ICMR and other research institutions. So I think that policy should be soon out. They're coming up with some kind of incentives for making aiming towards making India the one of the innovation hubs. Kind of, they're doing real benchmarking with the other places like Israel and some of the European countries.
Right, and we can always debate on whether or where we stand in our journey today, right? Maybe one good way to look at it is the partnerships to really start with, because that's going to fuel the ecosystem to start with, right? Not only just within Indian ecosystem, but let's look outside as well. It's more of a, need to identify where is the right type of opportunity and right type of talent available that can be leveraged on this one. But yes, it's still a question, open question, whether we are there yet or we'll need more effort. Certainly, there is a journey that we need to cover as an within the Indian ecosystem to really move into this track.
Good. With that, I think we're ready to wrap up. Thank you once again, Nishith, and over to you, Mansi.
Indeed, thank you so much once again, Dr. Nishith, for wonderful insights, for touching upon so many aspects of pharma. We really enjoyed this interaction. Once again, thank you, Venkat sir, for a wonderful chat and bringing out so many points. And like I said, thank you for bringing Dr. Nishith for this talk. With that, thank you, audience. And thank you for stretching it a little over, and we would love to take this forward. But yeah, we have to cut short as we're a little over on time. So thank you once again. Wishing everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. This is a pleasure to be sharing and discussing and learning from all of us today here. It's my pleasure. Thanks, Mansi. Thanks, Venkat.